Hey everyone, it's Megan here from Meghan Makes Do, and we are on week 3 of the Blake Bomber Make Along. And this week we'll be doing all of our seaming and we'll be making and attaching our pockets. So let's go ahead and get started. So it's time to start seaming our knit bomber jacket. So I have the back panel laid out here with the right side facing up, and the front panels laid out here with the right sides facing up. And we're going to be using the long tails that we have to seam across the shoulders. Now, depending on what size you're making will depend on how many inches across you're going to seam, because you're going to be leaving your neckline, your back neckline here, and a little bit of the front panel won't be seamed. So a few stitches here as well, unstitched. So starting from the outer edges and working our way in, we're going to seam according to the size that you're making across. So I'm making a 2X. I'm going to be seaming about 10 inches in from the edge in, and my neckline will kind of look like this at the end. I'll have a little bit of the fronts, the back, and a little bit of this front unseamed. So I'm going to go ahead and turn the camera closer and show you how I like to seam my shoulder seams together. Okay, so I'm going to quickly show you just how I like to seam my shoulders. Again, if you are having a hard time seeing, I'm really sorry. I will put a link in the description below because I do believe I have a couple other patterns that use the same type of method. It might be easier to see since we're using black yarn for this project. It can be kind of hard to see the little V stitches that are made, but working from the outside in, we're going to kind of just go through this first stitch here, and we're going to be working back and forth, but we're going to be going between like the stitches a little bit, so kind of back and forth like a mattress stitch sort of, but these top bind off stitches are going to kind of roll inward into a seam. So what we want to do is we want to pick up one leg from one stitch and one leg from the other stitch. And just kind of work back and forth all the way across. So instead of picking up like the top of the bind off stitch, we're picking up that actual stitch, so the legs of the stitch. And again, with this chenille yarn, it can be a little bit tricky when seaming. Sometimes our thread kind of starts, the chenille starts to come off of the thread, and so it ends up a little bit bare. So you can always instead just slip stitch with the crochet hook on the wrong side of your work. If you feel like that's a little bit easier, that'll still work as well. So whichever seaming method you prefer is totally fine. This is just the one I like to do, so you can kind of see here, it becomes almost like a seamless seam, and then the back, those bound off stitches kind of make a little ledge here on the inside of our work. But again, according to whatever size you're making, that's how far over you are going to seam. So like I said, I'm making the 2X, so I'm going to seam over from the edge in 10 inches, and I'm going to do the same thing for the other shoulder as well. So once you have your shoulders seamed, you can meet me back here and I'll show you how we're going to line up our sleeves to attach our sleeves. Okay, so here you can see I have my sleeve lined up. I've got the center of my sleeve lined up with this shoulder seam, and then I've measured down the armhole depth that I need to have and pinned it in place here. So we're going to start in the center and work our way down the back panel, and then go back to the center and work our way down the front panel, seaming these together. I like to use one long piece of yarn right here and have one tail go this way and one tail go that way. So it just is one complete piece of yarn going all the way down. So go ahead and cut a long piece of yarn and get that on your tapestry needle, and I'll show you how I like to seam these together. Okay, so here we're starting in the center. So we've got the center of our sleeve. So I'm just going to bring my long piece of yarn through here, and we want to have a long tail to use for seaming to the back and a long tail for seaming to the front. So just going to kind of adjust this so I have about the same length on either end. And I'm going to start by going from the center and seaming down the back panel. And again, if you are having trouble using a tapestry needle and this yarn, you can definitely just grab a small crochet hook and slip stitch these together on the wrong side. But I do like seaming with a needle and the yarn. It can get a little bit tricky. Sometimes the chenille yarn will kind of start to separate, like the chenille pieces will kind of separate on the thread. So if that starts happening, you can always switch or cut a new piece of yarn if you need to. But we're going to do basically similar to the mattress stitch, and similar to kind of how we did the shoulder seams. Instead of kind of going in and out through the bind off stitch, I'm going to kind of go through the loops on the top of the piece. And then kind of through the edges here along the back panel. So it may not be 100% exact. You kind of have to feel around and make sure that you're getting it in the right spot. But we're just going to go back and forth, picking up underneath the stitches on the sleeve and kind of going through the edge of the stitches on the back panel. And I find if we just kind of take our time and go slow, the yarn isn't as splitty. So this is a great time to put on a TV show while you're seaming, kind of distract yourself, and hopefully it won't take too long. So hopefully you can kind of see what I'm doing here. I know the black yarn is hard to see, but you get the general idea. But we're just going to be seaming our sleeves to our back and front panels, making sure the center of our sleeve is in line with our shoulder seam. So I'm just going to continue going from the center down until I've gotten to the end here, and then I'll go back and pick up the other side of that long piece of yarn and go down the front part of the panel. And then I just will repeat that on the other side so that both sleeves are attached. They're kind of going to be open wide, attached to the front and back panels. And then we're going to fold our bomber jackets in half and we'll seam the rest. Okay, so now that our sleeve is attached to our front and back panel, we're going to fold kind of the whole thing in half so that the sleeve comes together. And now we just need to seam the sleeve. And I like to start in the underarm, like the armpit area, and I'll just kind of use one of these long tails that I still have attached. Or if you don't have any long tails attached, you can also just cut a new piece of yarn. And again, just as before, you can either seam it using a tapestry needle and thread, or you can turn it with the wrong side out basically, and with right sides together, just slip stitch down using the chenille peel yarn. It's totally up to you. Either way, I suggest using some locking stitch markers to kind of keep your sleeve in place. But we're going to start in the underarm and work down the sleeve. When you get to the cuff, I would switch and pick up a tail of the basic stitch anti-pilling, or cut off a little piece and use that to seam the cuffs. And then once we get the sleeves done, we'll start again in the underarm and work all the way down the sides of our bomber jacket, again switching to the anti-pilling yarn when we get to the ribbing. So just go ahead and seam along the underarm sleeve and then down the side on both sides of your bomber jacket. Okay, so moving on to the pockets, you are basically going to be making a small little rectangle in stockinette stitch using the 3.75 millimeter needles and the chenille peel yarn. So I wasn't going to show you this part, it's just so super simple. And you work until you have the number of rows indicated for your size. So I'm making the 2X, I have 32 rows here. And both pockets are made exactly the same in the beginning, and then we're going to be decreasing on either side as we go up to create that opening for your hand. So for this pocket, we're going to be working across the row and then working our decreases on this left-hand side over here. And for the left-hand side, we're going to be doing knit two togethers. So I'm going to show you kind of how that will look. This will end up being the right pocket because it'll be on the right-hand side of your cardigan as you're wearing it, but we're going to be decreasing on the left side of the pocket. So I'm just going to go ahead and knit all the way across, and then I'll show you how to do the decreases at the end of the row. Okay, so we have 3 stitches left. For our first decrease row, we just are going to knit 2 stitches together. That's our decrease, and then knit the last stitch. For the next row, we're going to purl all the way across, and then we just repeat that until we have that nice diagonal line for our hand to slide smoothly in on the pocket. So you'll just keep going back and forth, always doing your purl rows in between your decrease rows, and you'll always be decreasing on that left-hand side of your pocket. And then when you're done, this is what the other pocket will look like. So see how our decrease is now on the right-hand side. This will be our left pocket. What you're going to do on that side is a knit one and then slip, slip, knit to create those decreases. So you get this nice diagonal edge here for the rest of your pocket. So your pockets will end up being basically mirror images of each other. So once I finish this pocket, I'll show you what they both will look like when you are done. Okay, so here are the 2 pockets. We have our left side pocket, which we've decreased on the right side of the pocket, and then our right side pocket, which we have our decreases on the left when it's facing you. So I know it's a little bit confusing, just follow the instructions that are written in the pattern. Again, the pocket's going to be slightly different depending on the size that you're making, so make sure you're paying attention to that. So now that our pockets are done, we're going to be adding a ribbed edge to it, and we're going to go up a needle size. We're going to go up to a 4 millimeter needle, and we're going to be working with the wrong side of the pocket facing you. So make sure that you have the wrong side of the pocket. And both ribbings are made the same way on both pockets. You'll just start on the opposite end depending on which pocket you're making. So you're going to go ahead and you're going to be picking up stitches along this diagonal edge for our decrease edge. And we're going to be using the basic stitch anti-pilling just as we used for our cuffs and what we'll use for our collar and our edging. So I'll pull the camera in a little bit closer here so you can kind of try to see what I'm doing. I know it's a little hard with the black yarn, but if you've picked up stitches before, you kind of know how it goes. So it can help with this fuzzy yarn to kind of pull your rows down a little bit so you can kind of see where that hole is to work into. But you're just going to pick up about 1 stitch for every row along that decrease edge. And you just want to make sure that you pick up an even amount of rows, or stitches, I guess I should say. So try to pick up in every row, but make sure that you end with an even amount. So if you have to skip one or add one, that's totally fine. It won't make that big of a difference. But just continue to pick up stitches along the decrease edge on your pocket, and then I'll show you how to do the 1x1 ribbing for this pocket too. Okay, so I'm picking up my last stitch here along that decrease edge. Again, make sure the right or the wrong side is facing you. So here are my stitches picked up. I'm going to turn my work. And now we're just simply going to make a 1x1 ribbing, same as the cuff. So I'm going to start with a knit stitch and then a purl stitch and repeat that all the way across my pocket, and we're going to do this for 6 rows total. Okay, so you can see I've worked my 6 rows. It's going to look a little funny here, your pocket, because the ribbon's going to kind of just jut out. So now we need to bind off our ribbing, and I like to use just the traditional bind off method, but I follow the 1x1 ribbing as I go. So to start, I'm going to knit 1, purl 1, and then slip and bind off that second stitch. Okay, and then I can knit 1, bind off, then we'll purl 1, bind off, okay, and then knit 1, bind that off, purl 1, bind off, and we're just going to repeat that all the way across. And when we're done, we'll want to leave a slightly longer tail so that we can sew that ribbing down onto the pocket. All right, so this is what it will look like when you are finished with your pocket ribbing. So I have the right side facing up, and I'm going to be pulling my ribbing down and trying to line up the edges of the ribbing with the top and the side of the pocket with the chenille peel yarn, and it will kind of stretch and make a nice little curve. So we're going to sew all along the very edge of the ribbon through our actual pocket panel. And I find that using my little clips, my Wonder Clips, are excellent for this because I can hold it in place. I'll put a link in the description below for these Wonder Clips. They are also part of a giveaway coming up next week, so you'll want to make sure that you pay attention to that. But you can just use your Wonder Clips to kind of keep it in place. So I like to pull and stretch my ribbing, and I get that edge of the ribbing lined up with the edge of the pockets. Luckily, this ribbon is very stretchy, so it should be very nice and smooth for you to get in there. And it's just going to create this nice little curved edge where our hands will go in for the pocket. So I'll just clip along that fold there. And then using that long tail that I left after we bound off, I'm going to use the basic stitch tail and a tapestry needle, and I'm going to be sewing down the edge of that ribbing to that pocket panel. So here you can see I'm using a blunt tapestry needle, and I'll just show you a couple stitches on how I do it. So I'm going to make sure that I'm attaching it all the way to that top part of the pocket. Really get that in place and secure. And then I'm just going to kind of go almost like you could either whip stitch along the edge here. You can go back and forth kind of, I guess, in up and down or in and out of the pocket like this. Just make sure that you get all the edge of that ribbing secured down onto the pocket panel. So just make sure you're taking your time with this. I like to work kind of into those bound off stitches. You don't want to pull too tightly, so kind of try to keep it somewhat loose, but make sure that you're getting that ribbing nice and secured onto your pocket panel. And you'll just continue this all the way down until you've reached the other side. and then you can take that off and you can weave in those ends if you prefer to. Okay, so once we have that ribbing sewn down, we can remove our clips. And this is what your pocket will look like. It's nice and secure, and we just give it that nice finished clean edge and curves a little bit. So I definitely recommend getting these Wonder Clips. They're amazing and they come in so handy. We'll use them again once we are attaching our pockets to our cardigan, which we will do next. So here you can see I have one of my front panels. I'm going to kind of open this up and lay it flat. So this is the bottom, and this would be the left side of my cardigan. So if I was wearing it, it'd be my left side. So you can see I have my ribbing here on the bottom, and then here is my edge. And we want to pin and clip our pockets in place along that edge. So here is my left side pocket, and I want to line up the edges and the bottom. So I want my bottom to be right along the edge of where that bottom ribbing ends, and I want the sides of the cardigan and the sides of the pockets to be flush together. And what we're going to do is we're just going to use clips, the Wonder Clips, to clip those in place, because we're going to wait to do any kind of sewing here or attaching here until we do our edging, which is next week. So for now, I'm just going to clip it in place using my Wonder Clips, and you want to go all the way along, kind of unrolling those edges as you go, so that you know that your pocket is going to be laying nice and flat against that front panel. Okay, so we'll just speed through this part so that you can just kind of see how I'm doing it. And I like to put a lot of clips on here. You don't have to use that many, but I just wanted to make sure that my pocket was going to be exactly where I needed it to be. So now that we have all those clips in place, we can kind of spread out our front panel a little bit, make sure that our pocket is laying smooth. You can kind of smooth it out from that clipped edge. And we want to make sure that we're laying down that bottom section of the pocket, and I'm going to use pins to pin this in place. And I just kind of want to stretch out my front panel a little bit because our ribbing tends to bunch up that bottom part a little bit. So make sure that you are getting it straight and in the right spot. And so I will just put a couple straight pins along this bottom edge here to make it easier for when I'm sewing it in place. Oh, looks like I did not get through both layers there with that first pin. So I'll make sure I go back and lay it out smooth. You can start from that clipped edge and just kind of move along, always kind of pulling on that pocket a little bit to make sure you're getting it in the right spot. And feel free to use as many pins as you feel comfortable using, whatever's going to make you feel like you're getting your pocket nice and secured and in place before we start sewing. So I'm going to pin along this side part of the pocket as well, and then that very top part of the pocket too. So anywhere where I'm going to be sewing that's not along that edge, wherever the clips are, we're just going to leave those clipped for now. But anywhere that I'm actually going to be sewing, I'm going to put pins in there so I know exactly where to sew, and I know my pocket won't move around or shift on me. Okay, so then the last spot is just this top part of the pocket. So we'll put a couple pins there, and then we'll get started. I'm going to show you a little bit of how I sewed the pockets on. Again, whatever method works for you is totally fine as long as you get those pockets in the right spot and make sure that you're sewing them to the right side of your cardigan. Okay, so I do have a few long tails left on the actual pocket of the chenille peel. That's what I want to use. So wherever I have chenille peel on chenille peel, I'm going to use those tails to sew. And then wherever I have the basic stitch, like right there along the edge of the pocket ribbing, I'll use that. So I'm going to use a long tail of my chenille peel and my tapestry needle to sew my pocket in place right there along the bottom edge. And luckily, because this yarn is that fluffy yarn, you won't really see the stitches, so it's a nice forgiving yarn for putting applied pockets on like this. So, and again, same as how I did the ribbing along the pocket, I'm just going to go from the back to the front to the back again, sewing down those first beginning cast on stitches of my pocket right up along that edge of where the ribbing is for the bottom part of my panel. Okay, so I'm just going to zoom in a little bit here so you can kind of see what I'm doing, and I've sped it up a little bit just so you get the general idea of how to sew your pocket on. So just continue to go back and forth, sewing your pocket in place to that front panel. Okay, so you get the general idea of how we're going to be attaching our pockets. You'll continue on with the chenille peel all the way along the bottom and up the side, and then I like to grab a long tail from the basic stitch and to sew down that little bit of ribbed edging of the pocket. And I'll do the same on that top edge of the pocket as well. And then you just repeat that on the other side, and here's what your cardigan will look like once your pockets are in place. Again, I still have those clips on because we're going to leave those there until next week when we do our collar and our edging. But that was the end of this week's tutorial. I hope that your Blake bomber is coming along nicely. It'll feel so good. You can start trying it on now. Make sure that you've got that good fit, and I will see you back here next week when we do the collar. Don't forget to check out the written pattern available on my blog and in my shop. Links to those are in the description below, and don't forget to like and subscribe for more.